And we are live with Now You See TV. I'm your host, Jake Grant, and we have an excellent show for you tonight. But before we get started, let's just do a little bit of admin stuff. For those of you who are joining us on YouTube, you can jump over to the nowuctv.org website, and here, if you scroll down, you can click on the link to the episode, which brings up this page here, and you can find a live chat, if we can get it to pop up here. All right. You can find the episode, you can watch live, and you can find the live chat, and here we'll be drawing questions for the show later on. Now, we also have some information. We have the Take on the World conference coming up in 2017. So be prepared to change your worldview is the tagline, and we're going to have some excellent speakers there. And also we have, for those of you who don't know, we have a subscription-based website which has a lot of extra contents, documentaries, some of the exclusive stuff that comes through Now You See TV, the Creation Club, some great stuff. So if you guys haven't checked that out, it's something worth to look at. Now, without further ado, let's jump back over here and get this show started. So tonight, the topic is the shadow of things to come, the holy days and the prophetic significance of these holy days. And we are joined by Steve Moutria, and it's a blessing to be joined by you, Steve. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be here every time.
Excellent. Now, this topic is very interesting because, you know, of course, the pastime of many people in the church, believers, tends to be eschatology, because when we're looking to the return of our King, we often throw around the ideas and when and what time is the Messiah going to return, and what can we be looking towards in Scripture to kind of reveal more to us about this timeline or the prophetic significance of his return. So, Steve and also Now You See TV, we love to jump into the feasts because the significance of biblical feasts is so enormous. The images and the pictures that they reveal is incredible. And Steve, if maybe you could just start us off with, you know, why would people want to look at these biblical feasts in the first place in terms of prophecy?
Right. Good question. Well, I think, you know, we do forget at least when I was in the church, and I think for most of us, we just take it for granted for some strange reason, you know, that, you know, Yeshua just happened to die on Passover, you know, just happened to rise from the dead on first fruits, you know, and it's like we don't really tie the connection of the importance of why it happened on those days. Yes, we would say it happened on those days, and we acknowledged it, but I don't think there was something just not clicking inside the head, you know, knowing it happened then because those are appointed times, you know. And something that concerns me, and I was going to say this, I mentioned to you a little bit before the show, is how a lot of times people will look and say, well, yeah, now, you know, all of the spring feasts are fulfilled. Okay, so therefore, now we're just looking to the fall. And I'm really concerned when I hear that, because things aren't fulfilled. Okay, it's cyclical. These are appointed times that had happened at those times back then because they're appointed times. But let's not forget that, you know, many have shown where Yeshua was born during the fall feasts. You know, some would say right at trumpets. Some will say it happened right at, you know, at the time of Sukkot. Nonetheless, however you want to take, we know he came during the first fruits, during the fall feasts. And then obviously we know what took place during the spring feasts, okay? And then obviously during that time, what do we have? We even have Shavuot being fulfilled, okay? So it's appointed times. And my concern is, if we're going to say, if we're looking only to the fall only for his second time, and I say because everyone called it second time, actually it's just his return. If we look to the fall only, we may be missing what can be taking place in the spring. You know, just as it happened in his first coming, came with involving the fall and the spring together. I believe this next time around when he returns, it's going to involve this fall and the spring the exact same way. Not the exact same way per se, but they're going to involve them in like manners, if you will. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, absolutely. And whenever we do look at the feasts, and we're throwing around these whole different theories and concepts of, how is he going to be fulfilling these in the last days? Too often, I find that I've even fallen into the camp of saying, well, he came the first time to fulfill the spring feasts, and when he comes again, he's going to be fulfilling the fall feasts.
Right.
But I do realize at the same time when I'm saying that God works in cyclical patterns. Yahweh has been doing things on these appointed times since he's put the sun, moon, and stars to tell the appointed times. And it's so fascinating to me that so quickly we can jump over the significance of these spring feast times for the fall feasts. But does that mean we don't keep spring feasts now that they've been fulfilled? I don't think so, because there's still I'm going to butcher this term, but a mikra, or a something that we rehearse, and it's something that we are still keeping even in the millennial reign. So there's no telling, even after he's come back, what are the things that are going to end up happening on these feast dates, even when he returns, significant things, who knows? But
Right.
it is very evident that we will be keeping biblical feasts in the millennial reign. It is very apparent that he wants us to be paying attention to these appointed times. So first maybe we can start kind of at a baseline. Is a lot of people who might be watching, they might not pay attention to these appointed times in Scripture. They might not see them as something for even us today to practice or look at. What would you say to somebody who's just now maybe stumbling onto this video, who's never kept a biblical feast, who doesn't know what the point of keeping a biblical feast is, but still, they believe the Messiah is coming back and he's returning?
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell them?
First, I would say they're not Jewish feasts. Okay, they're Yahweh's feasts. Because if for someone who doesn't practice them or rehearse them, like you said, the mentality is, well, those are the Jewish things, and at least that's what I had. And I think for the majority of many others, that was our mentality, was, well, that's what the Jews do. Okay. But in reality, they're Yahweh's days. Okay. And he gave them to us to remember him and those things to come. And so that being said, that makes them important because they came from him. Yes, we can look at how in one of my teachings I did, which one was it now? I can't remember. Oh, the Satan's Greatest Masquerade, that one in part 2. I show how, sure, the Jews have added much to the feast days and the holy days. But that doesn't mean we should just throw it all out. And then another question that comes up a lot is, well, what do I do? And well, first, what is supposed to be done can't be done. Okay, we have to understand that right here and now in order to obey them. Okay, you can't obey them. That's all there is to it. Because in them, as far as the feast days are concerned, okay, it says you're supposed to, to go to Jerusalem, appear before Yahweh, okay, which would mean at the temple. There's no temple, and Yahweh himself is not there now. Okay, so we can't go and appear before Yahweh. So what do? We do our best to rehearse them in remembrance of knowing that time is coming when we'll get to do that. And a lot of people struggle with that, as far as, well, if you can't do it, well, then you shouldn't do it at all, or whatever. And you don't have to. There's nothing that says, even for believers today who want to follow Torah, there's nothing that says you have to do it, okay? You either do it biblically or you don't have to do it at all. And I know that can offend people, but biblically speaking, that's the way it is. And for those of us who are trying to remember it, we're doing just that. We're remembering it, okay? Now, for those who want to say you can't do it, you shouldn't do it at all, well, hold on a second, because let's look at the time of Yeshua. Okay, we look at the second temple, and history has shown the Ark of the Covenant was not in the second temple. Okay, I bring this out in one of my teachings, regarding the Ark of the Covenant. And since the Ark of the Covenant was not there, that should scream volumes to us, because that means the holiest day, okay, of the year, that being Yom Kippur, okay, the Day of Atonement, that's the day when the high priest would go in and sprinkle the blood on what? The Ark of the Covenant. But it's not there, okay? So, but did they still remember that day? You know it. They honored that day. They remembered that day with reverence and fear. But yet they still couldn't obey it the way it should have been done. So, and those are during the days of Yeshua, remember. That's the temple that he was in, okay? So the same principle applies, I believe, for us. We simply remember it the best that we can, looking forward to the day when we can remember those days the way they're supposed to be done with Yeshua.
Excellent. Yeah. Just along with this whole concept of moving over from worldly traditions based in man, and moving towards things that are given by Yahweh, we see that, what we have to first leave behind before we can start to approach these prophetically significant feasts is the worldwide holidays. And this is just a curiosity that I have, and I wanted to ask you if you had an opinion on it. But do you see that while Yahweh shows us prophetic significance in his feasts, if in almost a flip mirrored image that there's bad prophetic language in holidays like Christmas and Easter pointing towards like the Antichrist coming or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Because if these appointed times are all meant for prophetic reasons, are those holidays also pointing towards the Antichrist while the feasts point to Yeshua?
Good point. I was speaking to an individual at one time. This is a year or two ago, and the conversation was brought up, because December 25th, we know is Yeshua's, not his birthday. Okay, not when he was born. However, there are many who will, point to, Semiramis and all of that goes in with, the anti-Messiah, the real anti-Messiah. Okay, and so we were discussing it. Do you think that would be when he comes to light? When he reveals who he is, and that's when he comes to save the day and what have you. And very possible. Very possible. And that could be a role of deception towards the Jews, because that's also a lot of times Hanukkah falls in that time frame, and so you can see where he can come in to deceive the Jews, okay, and the world, okay. So at that time frame, so could there be an upheaval during a fall feast, if you will, and all of a sudden, to your thing you had brought out at one time, how a false Messiah comes up, desecrates everything. Okay, well then here comes the real false Messiah, okay, to save the day. And how appropriate that would be to be at the Christmas time. The world will go, there it is. It was December 25th, or whatever. So very possible. I'm convinced in my heart that we shouldn't be convinced of anything. I think we need to really, I'm going to do a teaching on this. I hope and pray anyway real soon. I just put together a desk that we had gotten, and in the instructions, which I was following, by the way, even though I'm a man, I was following the instructions, and it said, don't tighten up any of the screws until it's all done. So, put them all in, put it all in place, and then once everything is in place, then go back and tighten it all up. And so I kind of feel that's how we should be with looking at prophecy. Yeah, you got this here and you got that there, but don't lock it in place just yet, because if you lock this in place, well, that will keep you from understanding this part over here. So give yourself wiggle room all the way around until we know it happens or begins to happen. Then we can say, there it is. Now we can, understand it fully. And I really think there's an important lesson there for us to remember that, don't be so, I hate to say this phrase, but hard-headed in our understanding, because we all are wrong on something, as you've always heard me say. So don't lock it all in just yet. Keep it floating. And so with that, what you mentioned, these pagan holidays that we all celebrate. Well, I can't say everybody, but majority of us, I know I did, and we celebrated them with an honest heart. Thinking we're doing right. And so that being said, there could be some who will reject Yahweh's holy days and still hold on to those pagan things, okay, thinking they're doing the right thing, holding on to, good things, if you will. But in that, we can't forget, Yeshua said, it's all about deception. So they're thinking they're doing good, but they're serving the anti-Messiah. So to answer your question, or to bring a wrap around there, yeah, I think very much we need to be mindful of these pagan holidays and that they could play a role. How? I don't know, but we should be open to it.
Mm-hmm. Something you said is extremely true. Is even us who have come into a Torah observant walk, we've left a lot of these traditions of the church. We've left just this, a lot of the things that we really hadn't searched out for ourselves, and we're just blindly following. And we left and started reading our Bibles for ourselves, applying the Word in our life. But we are not separated from being able to bring out of the church a spirit of rightism, a spirit of, I now have all, last says on whatever I'm doing. Let me explain. The spirit of rightism is it's, I'm doing something and I'm right and you're wrong. And because you're wrong, I'm going to bash you over the head until you get it right.
Right.
And this is something that even exists in the Torah observant walk, because we really did inherit it from our denominational backgrounds. If you did come from a denominational background, when I looked at those type of churches and how they kind of banded together with people who had a similar view on doctrine and practice, they have what I would call a spirit of rightism. It is our way is the best way. Our way is what makes us the remnant people. Our way is what makes us God's exclusive, special deal. And everybody else has it wrong because they're not doing what we're doing. But, whenever we really look at applying the Word to our life, if we have a heart to just do what it says and try to figure out how to please Yahweh and not please man, we can stop the rightism to our life, because we're not trying to please man anymore.
Right.
Between you and Yahweh, that your walk is then unfolding in your life. And so you're not trying to convince everybody else, because you're not trying to say, hey, unless you agree with me, then I'm not validated. Well, if you start with what your heart believes and you study it out and you've out and you're trying to walk it out the best you can, he doesn't fault you for that. And we'll be all set straight soon enough.
Amen.
So to kind of jump back over to our last question with the kind of the holidays, the Christmas and Easter, which are not in the Word, and this is possibly shocking to some people, but it comes out of paganism, and it is something in the Word that can be proven to be displeasing to Yahweh. It's not how we worship Him; it's how we worship Him in His way. Because He doesn't accept, things that we're honoring to false gods to be done in His name. And we see this, an example of this, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai and saw that they had created a golden calf, and they said, "We're worshiping Yahweh who brought us out of Egypt." Well, this is the same example of what's happening today. People are worshiping Yahweh in their way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Why would somebody want to leave behind these holidays if they want to be paying attention to future prophetic events, Steve?
Well, I think let's put the future prophetic events. You're talking the pagan holidays, correct? You're talking about?
Yeah, so why would somebody who's practicing those and not practicing biblical feasts, why would they want to start looking into biblical feasts? How can this unveil what we'll see in the last days?
Right. Well, first, I want to say that, you don't want to like not follow pagan holidays because they don't line up with possibly don't line up with the future prophecy. You don't want to look at your pagan feast days simply because they break the heart of Yahweh. Okay, it's disobedience, in my opinion. I know there's lots of opinions out there. Now, if you disagree, that's fine. I just respectfully disagree. Okay, don't argue about it. But I think that's why we don't want to. We want to have a heart that wants to please Yahweh. And here's the thing. I did a teaching a year ago, and it's called The Heart of Daniel. And to this day, it's one of my favorite teachings. And in it, everyone looks to Daniel 9, chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, because that's where we read all the prophecy that's going to be coming our way and blah, 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 the 77s and you name it. Okay, we go into it. But we forget about Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 through 23. Okay, remember, let's not read. This is what we always tell people, if you want to understand the New Testament, you got to do what? Understand the Old Testament. Same principle here, okay? So if we really want to get a grasp of the latter part of Daniel chapter 9, well, let's get a grasp of the first part of Daniel chapter 9. And in the first part of Daniel chapter 9, what do we find? We find Daniel on his knees in prayer for Yahweh's people. Why? Because they've broken the everlasting covenant. And he's crying for them. He's praying for them. It's no wonder that Yahweh revealed so much to him. Because why? He had a heart for Yahweh's people. He didn't have a heart, just show me the end times. Just show you. No, he had a heart. That's why he showed him so much about his people, because he had a heart for Yahweh's people. And I wish people would understand that. Stop trying to understand everything about prophecy. First of all, not one person's ever going to get it all. Okay. But I believe if we get our heart, mind, attention, everything focused on Yahweh's people first, okay, reach his people, intercede for his people. And remember, you can't reach them if you're not interceding. Just saying, okay? So if we're doing that, he'll start one bit at a time. He'll start showing us things. And I completely forgot where I was going with this because you asked a question. I'm so sorry. What was your question again?
Working here at this radio station, it's a Christian radio station. It's not a completely Torah observant group by any means. I'm the only one here who is Torah pursuant in any way. But on the air in the past, I had used the terms beast feasts in reference to Christmas and Easter, and it was equated to saying a cuss word over the air on live radio broadcasting. And so whenever we look at these holidays, first thing people say is, I'm just doing what I feel is pleasing to God. This is such a great time to bring people in. But from what I can tell, the bottom line is idolatry is defined as putting yourself or something above God and saying that this way is the way I'm going to go, irregardless of what pleases the Father. And so in the same way, why would somebody want to apply biblical feasts in comparison? Why would they want to stop those holidays,
right,
which are the world loves? First of all, that gives you the first big red flag.
Yes.
If the world loves it, you have to ask yourself, does the Father also? Because we can find very clearly throughout Scripture that there's a clear conflict of interest if the world loves something.
Yes.
And if I know anything, the world loves these two holidays, along with many other holidays, of course. Mm-hmm. But all are displeasing to the Father if they're rooted in paganism and they have this history. And so what the enemy has done is he's taken away something that shows us a prophetic image, that shows us what reveals the Messiah, which is the biblical feast found in Leviticus 23. So I'd like to start diving into what are these feasts, how are they prophetically significant, and what can we be looking for during these appointed times?
I'm glad you said that because, if you've seen any of my teachings, you'll know that I do my best to show how all of the feasts, okay, these holy days, Yahweh's holy days, have symbology within them that can point to Yeshua's return. I mean, all of them. I mean, I have looked at every single one of them. I'm thinking, man, he's really got us scratching our head, and I scratch my head a lot. You can see how thin I am back there. I'm always scratching my head going, my goodness gracious, you can see Yeshua's return in all of them. So now the question is, well, then which one is it? Okay. And I think this is why when we look at when Paul says, this day will not catch you by surprise like a thief. Why will it not catch us by surprise? Because why? We're doing our best in pursuing the ways of Yahweh via following his holy days. So when we're looking, I am a firm believer that, Yahweh is going to come, send his son on a holy day. It's not going to, I know many believe in the pre-trib rapture, and though I have some similar views, I don't believe what they believe. And especially when it comes to the sense of it can happen at any second. I'm sorry, it will not happen at any second. Yahweh has his what? Appointed times. And I think it's important for us to look through these things and find out when he may come. I wrote an article 2 years ago, actually. Then I updated it this last year, and then I've already got some new stuff to add to it. I'm pretty excited about it, actually, regarding the significance to the last day of Sukkot. Why is the last day of Sukkot significant? Why could it, I should say, be significant? There's lots that could point to Yeshua's return at that time. And then, of course, you've got, trumpets. You look through and actually, for those who are not into this, be mindful. Yom Teruah was the day. Okay, we call it the day of trumpets, when in reality, it's day of shouting. Yom Teruah. It's not Yom Shofar. It's Yom Teruah, which means day of shouting, day of shouts. So I think it's a lot of times we kind of, because of tradition, we're all guilty of tradition, right? Well, the traditional calling is day of trumpets when it's really day of shouting. So, but when we look at these things, they're all over. Yeshua has made it very clear that we should be looking and watching and praying, and I'm convinced that he's given, from my understanding and studying, I have seen a lot that I'm watching all of them now. I've heard people say, well, it's going to be just in the fall. It's just going to be trumpets, or it is. And I'm sorry, I'm not convinced as I used to be when I first came. I see Yeshua's return in every single one of them.
Wow. So, when we go through the feast, if of those of you who have not read through Leviticus 23, we have Passover.
Yes.
We have first fruits. We have unleavened bread, which is during that time of Passover. All of those are tied to Shavuot, or to Pentecost, Shavuot, and those are the spring feasts. So, first of all, Passover is not Easter. When Yeshua sat down with his disciples at a Passover meal during that time and says, "Do this in remembrance of me," he was not eating a Easter ham. They were probably eating Passover lamb during that time frame. And then we fast forward through the summer months. We come to the fall and the fall harvest time. And first of all, all of these feasts are directly associated with agricultural terms, because this is a large word for you guys. You can go look up. It's agrobiolinguistics. Okay. And that means their mindset at the time was based on agriculture, biology, and they used language to kind of, so in the beginning was the Word. There you're referring to Yeshua as the Word, and then we're seeds that are planted by the rivers of water. That's agriculture. And Yeshua says he gave his blood for us, and then you have biology. So with all these things, the feasts are related to agriculture, and the harvest. Of course, we hear in the end times, it's the great harvest. The tares and the wheat. And so we come up to the first fall feast, which is the Feast of Trumpets. So maybe we can start there, Steve, since that's the next one that's coming up This year, the next feast we are going to come up upon is the Feast of Trumpets. So, with the Feast of Trumpets, what is that feast, and how do we see that in Scripture as something that we need to be looking up for? Because maybe I can just throw this out there to kind of get us started. It is one of the feasts that no man. It is the feast that no man knows the day or the hour. So why is this?
Correct. And it's funny because I want to pull up the common verse that most everyone likes to refer to regarding the resurrection, and that would be 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And I'm going to read it for us here. And it says, let's see here, verse 15, according to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left to the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command and the voice of the archangel and the trumpet call of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. And this is where everybody, when I first started looking at Torah, I'm going, man, this is it. It's the day of trumpets, And it's very reminiscent. When you think about this, what's everyone doing? We're shouting and blowing trumpets. And what do we see here? That same thing at Yeshua's coming when he comes to take his bride. Okay, that first resurrection right here, the first resurrection. So there's obviously symbology that you can't ignore regarding the Day of Trumpets. And it's so funny because you asked me, why do we celebrate trumpets? Why do we do lots of things in the scriptures? I've yet to understand. And this is one of the ones that I have struggled with in understanding, why did he call this day to be? That's one that I've heard lots of opinions, don't get me wrong, but I've yet to be like saying, that's it. This is the reason why he has set this day for us. Now, that being the case, that would almost seem to imply, well, then there you go. Could this be the day for the resurrection? Since we don't really know, or have it locked down solid as far as why we do this day, I don't know. It's very possible. I tend to shy away from that because I don't see the resurrection taking on the Day of Trumpets, but it's there. You can't ignore the verbiage that is here, as I mentioned in 1 Thessalonians, and in several other places. Even if you look at, it's in Exodus, and I think it's chapter 19, if I'm not mistaken, when Yahweh is with his people, and they're all at the foot of the mountain. And when Yahweh came down, it said they heard a trumpet that grew louder and louder and louder. And it didn't stop. It just kept on going. And I'm going, wow, right here, okay, we're seeing a trumpet call. And all the people are what? Gathered around the mountain. And so, again, you see symbology where you see this stuff taking place. And I go, man, that's just too good. So all I can say is regarding the Day of Trumpets, maybe you have more on it than I do, Jake, but I have yet to be convinced of this is why Yahweh has us do it. All I know is he has this day set aside. We observe it as the first day of the seventh month, and we observe it the best we can with the shouting and blowing of trumpets. And that's what we do. One day it'll make sense for me, but it's not there for me just yet.
Yeah, and I think with any of the commandments, that's the first sign of a humble heart that is willing to be obedient to God's word, is saying, I may not understand why he asked me to do this, but I love him. And he did this. Yeshua practiced this. He walked it out. So I'm going to follow in his steps. The sincerest form of flattery is imitation.
Amen.
And so if we are keeping these commandments, whether we do or do not understand how they help us or how they are making us more set apart and holy to God, it is the sign of a humble heart that is willing to just live out his commandments in our life. And that's, in a lot of ways, it's living out these small commandments that seem so insignificant that sometimes bring the biggest blessing. I know when I first came into this walk, I started looking at the Sabbath. How is keeping a 7-day Sabbath going to be a blessing. What's so great about this? I can rest anytime. But then I realized the reason he asks us to live this out and keep the Sabbath day holy is because he wants to have a time to meet with us. He wants to have a time that we stop caring about the world and we focus solely on him and fellowship with others who also are focusing solely on him. And so whenever we look at like the concept of the Sabbath, the fourth commandment, for those of you who believe we should only keep the 10 commandments, well, the fourth commandment says, keep my Sabbath holy. And whenever we look in Leviticus 23, we find that these feast days are also considered Sabbath days.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to keep the 10, we also have to be looking at Leviticus 23 because these are also Sabbath days. And so
can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah.
That has been, do I agree? I'm going to differ here, because when we look at the feast days, it's the first and last days that are considered, what you would call, what you mentioned, Sabbath days. And I think that verbiage has messed some of us up, because nowhere in Leviticus 23 do we see Yahweh calling the first and last day, because it's the first and last day of unleavened bread, and actually you've got the Shavuot, and then you've got the first and last day of Sukkot, Tabernacles. These are the days that we traditionally call Sabbaths, or high Sabbaths, actually, what has been traditionally called high Sabbaths. But nowhere do we see Yahweh titling them as such. What we do see is, he says, you do no regular work, and then we're allowed to cook. Okay, because why? They're feasts. And so that's where I think, Jake, as you said, we've come to be calling them the Sabbaths, and they are in a sense, but they're not a true Sabbath. And I think, and I just wanted to clarify that, because I know that's been a lot of confusion. I've been talking with people on Facebook, and they would say that, and I go, where do we find that at? And then it all boils down to tradition. And I think what I think the Father has been digging in me is, why do you do what you do? And if it's because of tradition, then what makes me any different than what I was doing back in the church days? Okay. Now, don't get me wrong. Traditions can be good. And in fact, I think traditions are excellent. And many of the Jews have got awesome traditions. But when we declare those traditions as, this is what it is, you have to do that, well, now we got issues. Because now we're adding to the Torah instead of trying to follow it and trying to add things that may, for us, that will help us to remember, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm looking at kind of, in the Feast of Trumpets, when it's talking about the Feast of Trumpets, it calls it, a holy convocation.
True.
So these are special appointed times.
Absolutely.
For Father. Yeah, absolutely. And the Sabbath is also an appointed time for the Father.
Correct.
So these appointed times are significant for us to pay attention to. And so when we look at the Feast of Trumpets, the whole phrase, no man knows the day or the hour, so in so many ways has been taken out of context by those in the church to say, well, look, that means the rapture or whatever event's going to happen on a day no man knows to look for. It's just going to happen. I remember growing up as a kid, walking in the grocery store, and if my mom went around a corner too fast, I grew up in a Christian home, and I was always around strong eschatology talk, end time stuff. And so if my mom went around a corner too fast, I had to run around, and look and make sure they were still in the store, because I'd been told, Jake, you never know. It's just gonna, it's gonna happen. And so I remember, getting scared and nervous all the time, because I thought my parents were going to get raptured and I was going to get left behind. And I remember, getting scared out of my mind watching those Left Behind movies, because it also is playing on this whole idea, no man knows the day or the hour. Well, the Jews at the time, they associated that phrase with the Feast of Trumpets, because it's the one feast that falls on a day no man knows the day or the hour, a new moon. And I know there's different ways people calculate it, whether it be conjunction or sliver, but it always falls in a 3 to 4 day period where you're not exactly sure when that month exactly, on the nailhead starts. And so, it's why they associated, when Yeshua was giving them that sermon, they associated it with the Feast of Trumpets. So it's why we should be looking towards that time during the fall feasts to prepare ourselves. And with any feast, we need to prepare ourselves. And so that brings us to the next one, is the Day of Atonement, which is just definitely another major appointed time, which is it has a lot to do with preparing ourselves, getting ourselves ready, which all the feasts do. So maybe if you could talk about why the feasts are times that we are preparing ourselves, and maybe touch on the Feast of Atonement and why we should be preparing ourselves during these feast times, as we rehearse them and practice them.
Right. Well, regarding the Day of Atonement, this is a day that I think we don't truly grasp the magnitude of what this day means. Okay. This is the day when all of Yahweh's people are cleaned, and we are all made spotless on this day. Okay. And interestingly enough, as we mentioned before the show, one thing I think people kind of don't catch regarding when Yeshua was, crucified. Okay. Well, just before that, he's, placed before the people, and then they bring forth Barabbas. Okay. They all wanted Barabbas. Okay. So what do we see here? And then it says they let Barabbas go, and then they took Yeshua. Okay. The Lamb. What is that? That's a complete image of the Day of Atonement, where they take the two goats and they take one and they kill it. And then the one, they let it go. The symbology there again is like mind-blowing. We see it, but we don't really make that connection because, well, that's Passover. But in my opinion, we're looking at, or to me, it's Yahweh saying, look, this is all wrapped together, folks, type of a thing. And with the Day of Atonement, this is, as I mentioned earlier, that's the day when the high priest would go in, sprinkle the blood on the ark, what have you. So this is a day that I am really, I think, and I have been guilty of it at times in the past as well, that I don't think of it as much as I should, because it's the holy day. It's the one day. And if we always hear about the words of, he's coming back for a church without spot or wrinkle. Okay, well, here's a day when he's made his people without spot or wrinkle. Okay, this is the one day. So again, and that being said, it makes perfect sense that he would come then on that day when he makes his bride perfect. Mm-hmm. Now, is that the case? I don't know. But man, you can see the symbology. It's all right there.
Excellent. And I just wanted to read through this portion of Leviticus 23 that talks about the Day of Atonement.
Perfect.
And there's things we can really draw out of it. And it says this, starting in Leviticus 23:26, it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Now on the 10th day of the 7th month is the Day of Atonement. It shall be for you a time of holy convocation. You shall afflict yourselves and present a food offering to the Lord. And you shall not do any work on that very day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. For whoever is not afflicted on that very day shall be cut off from his people. And whoever does any work on that very day, that person I will destroy from among his people. Ye shall not do any work. It is a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest. And you shall afflict yourselves on the ninth day of the month, beginning at evening, from even to even shall you keep your Sabbath." And so, when we look at this whole idea of afflicting ourselves and preparing ourselves, if you look at what we are preparing to do, keeping traditional holidays, Christmas and Easter, really, what is the mindset you're putting yourself in? Is, oh, I can't wait to get stuff. I can't wait to, feast out on all the goodies and all the stuff I'm about to jump into.
It's all about you.
And then exactly, it's all about you. And then at the same time, when you compare these to the things the Father asks us to be mindful of and to pay attention to during His feasts, it's a completely different mindset. The focus is no longer on us; it's on our neighbors. It's on the Father Himself, because we're preparing ourselves and we're humbling ourselves, especially When we look at the Day of Atonement, this is the one time, a lot of people say this is the day of the fast. This is the one day where we're not feasting and celebrating. We're getting ourselves, ready and getting serious about how sin is a very serious thing. But then the following feast, the following appointed time, the last of the fall feasts is the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles. And this is extremely, extremely prophetically significant. And so maybe you can dive into what is the Feast of Tabernacles.
Oh, well, this is when it's the day, or I should say the week, 8 days actually, because this is the only 8-day feast we have. And it's where we actually live in tents for the all 8 days. And it's to remind us of, how Yahweh's people lived in tents throughout the desert, those 40 years. And so this is a time that, at the same time, I believe it represents of when Yahweh will be with his people again. And so that's why I'm reminded of my article that I mentioned earlier, the significance of the last day of Sukkot. If you haven't had a chance to check that article out, you may want to check it out. And I'm going to be updating it here in next month, because I've got some new things that I'm kind of excited about. But when you look at what it represents, Yahweh being with his people, and again, that being the case, you can see the return of Yeshua coming at this time as well, because it's him being with his bride. Okay. So again, there's something there for us to look at, to consider, to keep our heart and mind open to, and not to be dogmatic, but I think to be open to. And the first inclination would be, well, it's going to happen at the beginning of it. Then wouldn't that make most sense? Because that's when he comes, then we're with him. And I agree. It would seem to make the most sense. But as I did some research on it, it was actually the last day of Sukkot, which was actually, I don't know, just sticking out like a sore thumb to me. I'm going like, that's the day. If it's to be at this time, that would be the opportune time for it to be fulling out according to the prophets in my understanding anyway.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the wedding supper of the Lamb. It's the big party after he's come back and he's rescued his people. He's given us glorified bodies at the time. This is the celebration where we're all sitting down and he's consummated the marriage. He's here with us, dwelling on earth, ruling us here, and at the beginning of the millennial reign. And then it'll be something that they practice yearly as the feasts happen yearly. I'm going to look up that verse momentarily that talks about going up and keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. But since we are talking about prophecy and these appointed times, whenever we think about eschatology, the big figure that comes up, of course, is the Antichrist. All right. And that brings to mind a verse that is extremely interesting, in my opinion, because it is something that reveals what part of the deception the Antichrist brings is. And this is Daniel 7:25. And it says, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given unto his hand until a time and times and the dividing of a time." So in this verse in Daniel, and it talks about how he's seeking to change times and seasons. What have you found this verse is talking about? Has he already changed the times and seasons, or is he going to in a future sense?
Yeah, I think that can be done. It can be one of those things that's twofold, where you'll have someone say, well, he's already done that through the Catholic Church and through this. Yeah, boy, you look at that and the arguments that they can bring forth, lots of good debates can be brought forth to show that, yeah, it's already happened. But at the same token, I still see there'll be things taking place in the end that's going to be all about deception, and that also ties into where I was at on my teaching on the Satan's Greatest Masquerade, that, it's about deception. And whenever this guy comes forth, he's going to say, look, it's been changed. Okay. And One of those things is that of, okay, this is going to be possibly controversial for some, so not meaning to be controversial, but there are some out there who believe because Yeshua is our high priest in heaven, they say, therefore, he's going to be our high priest on earth during the millennium. Okay, well, he can't, okay? Because if he does, that means he's doing away with part of the law. And he said, not one jot or tittle is going to be removed from the law until heaven and earth pass away. So, but if you have this man come forth and says, hey, I'm the high priest now, and this is how it's going to happen because I'm the high priest. If you look at in the scriptures, I'm the one, because he's going to come forth saying he's Yeshua, okay, to a degree to make those, the very elect, believe him. All right. That being the case, I can very easily see this as being an element of something being changed. Okay. And when you go to times, okay, well, that's in seasons, that's the Moed. Okay. Especially if you go in Genesis, we're talking, the stars are given for the signs and seasons, right? Well, we don't need the stars to know if it's fall, winter, spring, or anything like that. We need the stars for the Moedim. Okay, that's what it shows us. Okay, fall feasts are coming up. You name it. It's to keep us in cycle. And so, that being said, what will he change? It'll be something with the Moed. Has to be. Could he change it to Christmas? Who knows? I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things that it's all speculation, I think, until it happens. And then when it happens, we're all going to go, oh, there it is, type of a thing.
Yeah, and I mean, really what it boils down to is what calendar are you paying attention to?
Right.
Because right now we have the Gregorian calendar, which is made by man, and it's impossible to operate in this world without a slight understanding of what date you're meeting with somebody or are you during this month or that month, because the whole world operates by this. And so in the same way, are we paying attention prophetically to, things that'll happen based on a man-made calendar, which doesn't make any sense? Or
Right.
Are we looking towards how Yahweh views appointed times and seasons? And so we got to get on his page because he's not going to get on our page.
Right.
So,
right.
And that's really kind of what it boils down to. And I looked up that verse from 14, and it's talking about what we were mentioning, the wedding supper of the Lamb, the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says this, this is in a prophetic context. It says that everyone who survives of all the nations that have come up against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Booths. And this is, synonymous with the Feast of Tabernacles. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that this makes me wonder is, I've been told by so many people growing up that, he's going to just wipe everybody out. Nobody's going to survive when he returns. But it seems to me in this verse, it's talking about people who've survived after he's returned that are going to be having to come up to the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says in verse 18, and if the family of Egypt does not go up and present themselves, then on them there shall be no rain. There shall be the plague which the Lord afflicts the nations that do not go up to keep the Feast of Booths. If he is returned and he's here, and there are people alive, if not keeping the feast is sin, how is there sin operating in the world while he returns? How is he going to stamp that? I mean, I've always been given the impression that sin is going to be completely removed from the earth when he returns. So maybe you can expound on this topic of how people can reject going up and keeping an appointed time.
Yeah, it's funny you bring this up because I was pretty much born and raised that same mentality that during the millennium, there will be no sin. Well, as you mentioned, this verse really clearly shows that not to be the case. And though I believe that there will be a lot less sin, you still have the nations. You still have the nations who will not be following the ways of Yahweh. And It's kind of funny if in the after the millennium, okay, Revelation chapter 21 and 22 is where we read this, where it says there will be, I think it's in 21, where it says there'll be no more sea. Okay. And I used to believe that comes after the millennium, but I'm leaning more and more now that happens during the millennium, meaning that during the millennium, the oceans will start receding, okay, and land will start rising. Why? To make room for all of the people who's going to be growing, multiplying and multiplying and multiplying over and over and over. I really see that. The more I keep pondering it, I'm going, man, I can really see this. We always, when we read something, it takes place after this. Well, that means it happens right then. We have a hard time thinking it may develop and then it's completed at that time, And so I'm really leaning that during the millennium, the oceans will be receding, okay, and making room for all. Because if you think of it, at the end, okay, and it says Satan is released for a season. We don't know how long that season is. That season could be a day, could be a week, it could be a month, it could be 100 years. Though I don't see that, okay, we have to be open that we are not given a time frame. Okay, it just says he's released for a season. Goes out and deceives the nations. Okay, not nation, but nations. Okay, so here he goes out and deceives them. Well, how many are there? It says those who he deceives number the sand of the sea. Okay, so that's a lot of people. Okay, so to me, I see that as all playing a role there. Now, I forget what our question originated here. The bottom line is, go ahead.
Yeah, we're just talking about kind of, how can there be
sin at that time? Correct.
To a reigning here.
Yeah, Yahweh's laws apply to who? Apply to the world, okay, but only to those who are going to follow him. Okay, there, just like today, there are people who are living and breathing who are not following his laws. They're under the curse. Okay, they've not chosen to walk in life. They're walking in death. Okay, that's just the way it is. And so I really see the same principle applied. But when Yeshua comes, all questions will be answered. There won't be multiple calendars. There won't be multiple days or ways to observe this or ways. We will all know what to do, what to say, how to say it. Okay, and if you think of it, it's Isaiah and Micah both say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord." Okay, to the house of Jerusalem. I'm misquoting it horribly bad at this moment, but the thing is, the law goes forth from Jerusalem. Yahweh himself, through Yeshua, will be teaching everybody the law. And I believe also the 144,000, they'll be the judges throughout the lands, okay, at that time. So that being the case, I think it shows us that everyone is going to be learning the Torah. Only those who are in the resurrection, the first resurrection, they're the only ones who will have the law written on their hearts at that time. They won't have to be taught because they will know it, okay? But those who are in the millennium, in the regular bodies like we have right now, they will be learning just like we're learning today, but under Yeshua and learning it right.
Who's the best? The best teacher there is Yeshua himself.
Yeah, so, amen to that.
This is kind of interesting that we're talking about the millennial reign, and I think it's so fascinating that you brought out that whole idea that the waters are going to be receding to make room for the nations. Because if people are going to be living and they'll be called cursed if they die at 100,
right,
then just imagine how many kids somebody can have if they're also beginning to live 200-300 years.
Yeah.
It's just the population of the world is going to explode.
Yes.
And I was talking with Rob Skiba in the last Virtual House Church, and we started throwing back and forth this kind of idea that what if this is postulation that, this is, just something we were tossing back and forth that you might think is interesting, but what if part of the deception that Satan uses to deceive all the nations as the sands of the sea, is what today we view as modern Hollywood. If, the world crumbles and there's a nuclear apocalypse or whatever, and we put all our Marvel movies and all our, superhero DVDs in a big metal case somewhere, and at the end of the 1,000 years, boom, this case pops open and they start popping in, Thor movies and stuff like that. Then what if, that what if that could be playing a role in the deception that he uses when he's released at the end of the 1,000 years, and all these people are like, look at this just recording of actual events, because maybe they don't have a concept of CGI or something, but how convincing a DVD would be to somebody 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago.
Right.
If you showed somebody a Marvel movie 500 years ago, they would look at it as reality because it looks like reality. So, we're just, it's just really postulation on what that deception is and why he allows that deception during the end of the 1,000-year reign. So, I have many questions on that topic myself. Of course, we can't know for sure why he releases them at the end of the 1,000 years. But I want to know. I'm curious. Maybe I'll find out one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm right there with you. And something that, I know a lot of people will differ with me on this, and that's okay. But I know it seems as if people view technology as evil. Okay, well, I don't. Okay, certain kinds of technology, sure. Okay, but I mean, let's look at, a plow where you'd pull behind a horse or a big bull or whatever. Well, technically speaking, that's technology. Okay, compared to what Adam had, that could have been technology. Okay, and we look at a car. Well, that's technology. So I don't think it's that, technology is evil in itself. It's what man does with technology can be evil. Now, because here's my thinking too. If we're looking at the millennium, okay, and we know that, as you mentioned, the verse regarding Egypt, if they don't go up, they will receive no rains. Well, what about someone who lives far away? I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, if we don't have some kind of technology, even if, like I actually do believe it's plausible that all the continents are a reverse Pangea, if you will, everything comes back together. Okay, Pangea is now back together. Even then, you take yourself from the farthest end, it's going to take a long walk to get to Jerusalem. Even if you got a horse and donkey, okay, it's going to take a long time. By the time you get there and you head back home, by the time you get back home, well, you're turning right back around to go to the next feast. So to me, there's something going to be allowed. Technology will be allowed. I just believe it. I know that it's hard for some to receive that, and that's okay. I'm not saying I'm right, okay? But I just believe that he's going to allow us to have technology. I just see that. And I get kind of excited about it. You think of all of the movies, Tomorrowland and stuff like that, and where they dream about the future and it's all this good stuff. Well, maybe it is that. Okay, maybe you've got technology where it doesn't rely on fossil fuels and doesn't harm the environment and all this other kind of stuff. There's so many things, and I really believe that Yahweh will allow a lot of things that we think is evil that it's not evil. But that's my opinion, and I'm not saying it's right either.
Yeah, and I mean I think I agree with you in a lot of ways. How are all these people from across the world going to be coming up from year to year? Well, they got to have some form of super fast transportation, because otherwise they're spending 6 months of the year on the road.
Correct. Yeah.
And of course, we, for some reason in my mind, I have this idea that, when Yeshua returns, we're back to horse and buggy days. We're back to the medieval ages, or farther back. Of course, it would be Semitic ages, I guess you could say.
Right.
But what if that technology exists, and through his Torah first that keeps us in line from twisting it for evil things, he allows the understanding and the technology of the world to grow.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very plausible. So now that we've covered the fall feasts, which are the next ones coming up, we've talked a little bit about the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, all of which are wonderful, awesome times that are so fun to celebrate, very important scripturally to the Father that we pay attention to. Now let's move back to the spring feasts, which so often are said to have been completely fulfilled already. These are times that, we, of course, because of the mindset, the majority of the Christian church, they say the spring feasts have been fulfilled. That's why we keep Easter versus Passover, because we don't have to do that Jewish stuff anymore.
Right.
So let's jump on to the spring feasts, starting with Passover. What do you see? What is Passover?
Well, obviously we know Passover is, and I think we can't forget is that the Passover that we look at in Egypt, that wasn't the first Passover. Passover, all of the feasts were celebrated long before Leviticus 23. Okay, these are things that Yahweh had given his people long before. In fact, if you look at what I have mentioned before regarding Lot, okay, when Lot left, I believe with all my heart, he left on Passover. In fact, the night before, whenever he was making the bread for the angels, it said he made unleavened bread. Okay, that's like saying, hey, have you put the tree up yet? For those who celebrate Christmas, they know it's Christmas time. When you mention unleavened bread in that fashion, it's talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I believe very firmly, in my heart anyway, that was the night of Passover, and the Passover meal was eaten. And then the next morning, what happened? Well, Lot's taken out. Same principle here we see with Egypt, okay? That night, Passover lamb, salvation, next day they're gone. And so I can really see how in the end times that there'll be a parallel here. Exactly how it's going to play out, I don't know, but this is something I believe is plausible. I really believe that the anti-Messiah will be revealed at this time frame, okay, on a Passover. And then, in fact, I mentioned this before, if you look in Revelation, and it's in Revelation chapter 11, if I'm not mistaken, and it talks about the two witnesses, okay, it says their bodies will lie dead in the streets in the city that is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, okay. And then, well, we know it's talking about Jerusalem. Okay, but why is it figuratively called Sodom and Egypt? For the same reasons I just gave you. Sodom, we have Lot leaving on a Passover. And what do you have with Egypt? We all know that story. Hebrews left on the Passover. So, in my opinion, again, just my opinion, I really see it very plausible that this will be the time frame when the anti-Messiah is revealed for who he is, okay? And then that's when what? The Jews flee. Massive exodus. They flee to get out of Dodge. And that's when Yeshua says, when you see the abomination, it causes desolation, what? Flee. Let those who are in Judea, okay, flee. So that's how I see Passover possibly playing out in the end times. And even to this day, I still see that. Now, could I be wrong? Absolutely. But I think that there's this, when it says that, what figuratively called Sodom and Egypt in Revelation 11, there's something to be said there. So I can easily see that Passover playing a role with that in the end times.
Now, Steve, you really brought out a understanding of the story of Lot that I'd like you to maybe recap on. I know you mentioned it a second ago, but it blew me away whenever you brought out the fact that they were eating unleavened bread whenever the angels appeared to help Lot leave. And that was just so fascinating to me. Why? Maybe you can dive into really why is it that Lot left on Passover? Because to me, whenever you talked about this topic, it really showed the feast pre-existing and predating Moses in a very profound way. And I'd love for you to just explain a little bit more about that whole story with Lot.
Well, to me, when I think of Passover, I think of salvation. Okay, and that's what you think of, and it's what we see. Okay, when we look at with Lot, he was saved. Hebrews, they were saved. Even with us through Yeshua, we are saved from death so we can walk in life. He allowed us to come back in through that. So it's all about salvation. And when we look at, Yahweh's word, it says Yahweh's word is forever. Okay, it's eternal. And just because something wasn't written, okay, before Moses, it doesn't mean it wasn't followed. And most all who study the Hebrew scriptures far more than I do, and ever I would ever want to dream about it, they'll say that the law was given orally way back when. Okay, it's just what we see though is that each time it was given, he would reveal a little bit more. Okay, for example, and this can be controversial for some people, and I don't mean it to be, but how can I say this? And I want to make sure that I say it clear and understandable. Yahweh's word, bottom line, is eternal. It will never be taken away. It will always be there. Okay. And even though, like right now, we say, well, we can't follow, the sacrifices. Well, why? Because there's no temple. Okay. But once there is a temple is established, well, boom, we can start doing it again because the law says to do that. Okay. In fact, when we look at eternity after the millennium, question, is there a temple on earth after the millennium in the eternal kingdom? Answer is no. Okay, there is no temple on earth. Why? Now Yeshua can be the high priest on earth. Hebrews chapter 8 verse 4 says that as long as, says Yeshua cannot be a high priest on earth as long as there's a temple. Okay, why? Because the law says it's for the Levites. Okay, that's what it is. So back to this point, the law has always been, okay, and he has just revealed more and more to us. For example, Adam didn't wear tzitzits. Okay, there wasn't anybody around. Okay, but as that need became known, he wrote it down. He goes, okay, guys, this is the last one I'm giving you. This completes it. And that's why I believe Yahweh wrote it down. Everyone I've heard it said, he says, okay, look, now I'm going to tell you this again. Here, well, let me write it down for you. Do I need to come down there and leave it out for you? And that's what he did. So, okay, that's how it's always joked about. My belief is that he had Moses write it down because it's all solid now. This is it. Okay, there's nothing more. There's nothing more to be revealed. This is all of it. Okay, even though it existed back here, maybe not all of it was revealed to them because it wasn't needed. Like Adam didn't need the tzitzits. Okay, the point is though, when it came to Moses, there was nothing more to be revealed, and so there it all is. It was all there beforehand, and they followed much of it, especially the holy days. But at the time of Moses, that's when he wrote everything down. A lot of people struggle with that. And that's okay. I understand that struggle because I've been there before too as well. But we need to remember Yahweh's word is eternal. Okay, and it's gonna and even then, in eternity, just because we're not following the Levitical law does not mean the Levitical law is not there. But the temple is not there. So therefore what? That part of the law is simply not followed. Okay? And so that's the thing we have to remember. His word is eternal. And just as much as we look through Moses and we look all that he gave us, they had it beforehand just the same.
I've heard it said that the commandments that we're trying to keep today, although we want to live out anything that we come across in the word that could apply to us, the commandments that we keep today is that which the Israelites kept when they were in the dispersion, and the Jews kept whenever they were gone to Babylon. And as we understand, we are grafted into Israel, but technically we're still in dispersion. We are not in a centrally located area where we're in the land, where we're around a temple. And so we're keeping the commandments to the best of our abilities without doing it wrongly. So it's better to keep it right than to do something, awful. Like, we're not sacrificing pigs just because we see the concept of sacrifice in the Old Testament. We're wanting to do it according to a way that's pleasing to Yahweh. And so if we're trying to keep it in a way that's pleasing to Yahweh, it's to start. So, whenever we look at these appointed times, the next one that comes up is unleavened bread, and this kind of goes into the feast of first we have first fruits, which is the time Yeshua resurrected, and this is something the Christian church and a majority takes to say, oh, this is so significant because he rose on the first day of the week. We are now keeping a new holy day on Sunday. This is somehow prophetically significant because he rose on the first day of the week. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the Feast of First Fruits and why it is Yeshua rose on that day.
I don't know if you've, I just put out an article on Shavuot, okay? And in that article, it's a rather short article actually, but I show how if you look at the timing given in the scriptures I believe the scriptures show us that when they left Exodus, okay, then we always look to first fruits, okay, as the Red Sea crossing. At least that's the way I have always been brought up. That's it. And I've even taught it before. Makes sense, right? But as I did the timing, and I show the timing in the article, the first fruits shine this, how when we see when Yahweh came down to visit them, and the day when they actually made the covenant with Yahweh. Okay, this is like in Exodus 24-ish, something like that. And in this, if you look at the time and you go backwards, it puts the Passover on a Saturday, on a Shabbat. Okay, meaning the next day was what? The first day after the Sabbath, making it first fruits. Okay, and so therefore they left Egypt on first fruits. It's trust me when I say it, it's like, what? And I know it makes it sound like it's so bizarre, but if you read the article, you'll see how the timing, it's all there. It all makes perfect sense. And so first fruits is all about freedom. And what do we see with Yeshua? He rose on first fruits, freedom. It's all there. And I'm actually pretty excited about that article. And am I saying it's all 100% correct? No, but I think it's presenting something that we've never looked at before, and I think we need to be open to it. And so first fruits to me is no longer the element of walking through the Red Sea. I think first fruits is truly the deliverance out of bondage.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we look at the whole concept of the first day of the week replacing the Sabbath, in my mind, the reason I'm really bringing up this topic is because it seems synonymous with Sunday has replaced the Sabbath, and Sunday has also replaced the feast dates, as well as we now keep, Easter Sunday, we keep, Christmas, which may or may not fall near Sunday, I'm thinking. So anyways, whenever we look at this whole concept of, the Sunday being used to replace the Sabbath day, and in a lot of ways used also as a justification of a change in the commandments. Whenever I've boiled it down in conversations I've had with people who are against keeping feast days or Sabbath or eating according to the scriptures, there's this understanding of a moral, a ceremonial, and a civil law that they kind of use to pick and choose commandments. It's without fail, it's always how they approach the argument. It's always how they approach, well, the reason I don't keep feast days is because that's a ceremonial civil law. And what they've done is they've separated in their mind this idea of the law of Moses is the law Moses gave the people, and the law of God is the law God gave the people.
Right.
So, and in the law of Moses is these commandments about keeping these feast days, paying attention to these feast days, practicing these feast days. So maybe if you could just, how would you approach that topic in discussing with somebody who says, well, there's a ceremonial, civil, and a moral law, and we keep the moral law because, we're, moral law is what defines sin. Is there a difference between the law of Moses and the law of God, or are they one and the same?
I have a teaching I made on that when I was back at 119, and I think it's actually called The Law of Moses versus the Law of God. Okay, and so if you're interested in that, you can look at that, and it's on our website as well. But to answer your question, if there was somebody who came to me and said, well, here it is, Stephen, just gave me that argument that you just gave, my first response would be, should we obey what Yahweh commanded the disciples? Okay, what did Yahweh command the disciples? Whatever he commanded them, should we not follow them? I'm talking Yeshua, okay? When Yeshua says to the disciples, hey, love one another. Well, should we love one another? Yes, okay. If he says, do this to the disciples, then we should do that, okay. If we believe that we should follow what Yeshua says to do, then we should obey Moses, bottom line. And the first response is, well, no, we shouldn't, because he did away with the law. Okay, but let's go back to my question. Do we obey what Yeshua commanded the disciples? So of course, they're going to say yes. And if they say yes, if they agree, okay, we read in Matthew chapter 23. I'll read the first few verses. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Okay. He just said, they're preaching Moses. So therefore, you obey them. Because why? They're preaching Moses. But don't do what they're doing, because why? They're not living out Moses. They don't walk what Moses walked, okay, and taught. But whenever they teach Moses, you follow that. You follow Moses. You teach, they taught Moses, so therefore you follow Moses. And to me, there's no get around that. There's literally no way to get around that scripture.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And because what the enemy comes to do is steal, kill, and destroy.
Amen.
And it seems to me like the commandments that are bondage, and out of the pulpit, it's taught that it's bad to keep these commandments.
Yep.
The commandments that are bondage, or something we should shy away from and shun anybody who does these things, are keeping the feasts, keeping the Sabbath, and eating according to his commandments, eating according to the word. And in my humble opinion, these three areas really bring the most identity and blessing to a believer's life. All the time, us in the Torah pursuant walk get that we're being legalistic. Oh, we're just doing all this extra stuff that we shouldn't have to do. Jesus is freeing us from these things. But we find identity in obeying the commandments of God. If we read through Psalm 119, which your ministry that you were a part of before is very, aptly named, because in Psalm 119, it's a love letter to the commandments of God. And if you just take the time to read the longest chapter in the Bible, by the way, you'll see that, it is something that we should also have the heart of David. We should have a desire to keep and follow these commandments. And that includes, one, eating according to his word brings us a blessing of health. If sin brings a curse, then if we're eating while disregarding the word of God, we're cursing ourselves.
Right.
And keeping of the commandments is always associated with blessing and staying away from curses. It's the fence around us. And so when we move on, we see it's the Sabbath day. It's where we rest. It's a marker between the Father and his people. It's a thing that makes us set apart and makes us an odd group, because we're keeping the Sabbath day. What do you mean? You guys are so weird for not going and spending money on this day. Everybody can spend money on any day, whatever, no. Right. We want to be set apart. And then that brings us to what we've been discussing tonight, is the appointed times, the feasts, which really reveal a lot. And, I wanted to kind of bring up a little side topic in regards to the feasts and why they, if you guys haven't seen why biblically they are very significant for us to pay attention to, is the whole idea that the enemy constantly seeks to profane the feast days. And we see all the time awful things seem to fall on these feast days because the enemy wants to profane it. You know, we see terrorist attacks and just events around these feast days because the enemy wants to profane them. So
Right.
if at the same time we're paying attention to these times because we're looking for prophetic events to come about, you know, we should be paying attention to these times because the enemy knows when they are, and he's trying to just desecrate them. He doesn't want us to see them as something beautiful and valuable. And so, you know, if we're paying attention to them, we're being aware of, you know, just things that are going on in the world also, you know, from that other perspective. I guess it's another reason to pay attention to these.
Amen. Yep. No, I agree 100%. And the sad part is there are so many people who they just don't see it. And why, you know, why in the world has the Father allowed us to see it? I don't know. I have shaken my head many and many nights thinking, why did he allow me to get it? You know, I'm very extremely thankful and humbled that I even somehow, some way it clicked for me, you know. And I can only hope and pray that, you know, I'm doing my part to help others see it, you know, and I don't want to be found guilty of pushing people away. You know, I want to be doing all I can to drag people in, you know. So, but
Absolutely. You know, you're exactly right. I feel that same way as, you know, why me? Because it's a tremendous responsibility knowing that you see the word for what he intended us to see it as something for us, as instructions, as blessings. And now it's on us, on our viewers who see the value of keeping God's commandments. It's now on you to bring that and to live your life out, to be a light to the world. And that is a tremendous responsibility. It's daunting.
Yes. Yep. Agreed. You know, that being said, you know, with the last teaching I made just last week, you know, on the last man standing, you know, I had someone tell me, and they had said that, you know, look, the gospel's already offensive. You know, it's going to offend people. And I agree. But since we know that, and we're mindful, shouldn't we therefore be mindful that if it's going to offend people, how should we present it for they will accept it? Are you just adding to the offense and pushing people away? Or are we trying to help them receive the offense? It's a big issue. It's a big difference. And I think all too often we have all pushed people away instead of trying to help them receive the offense.
Excellent. You know, just one last quick statement, and then I'm going to jump into a couple questions we got before we wrap up tonight. So, guys, if you're in YouTube, jump over to nowuctv.org. You can join the Rumble chat, and if you want to ask questions, now's the time to do so. And anybody in the Rumble chat now that wants to ask questions, please go ahead and send them in, because we're going to go ahead and get started asking these questions. But, you know, as more and more people start to realize that the feasts are times to get together with believers, that we shouldn't forsake the assembling together of ourselves. And you know, from what I've studied out, he was talking about these appointed times, that, you know, we don't need to forsake those times, because really, you know, Israel at the time, they didn't have money to go up, you know, all the time. They only made the journeys, you know, during the feast times to get around and hear the Torah read during those times. And so, as we see more and more people waking up to the value of keeping God's feast dates and his appointed times, you know, I can just imagine fields and fields of people camping out and keeping the Feast of Tabernacles together. You know, people gathering together and keeping Passover in homes all over the city. And, you know, just it's such a beautiful thing, because, you know, I remember being so isolated when I first came into this walk, Steve. And it's a thing that many people have experienced. But it's starting to grow. You know, more and more people are starting to see this all over the world. if you guys haven't seen the 119 Ministries Fellowship Finder map, it's a perfect example of how much this is just sweeping the world by storm. This is the revival and the outpouring that people are looking for, that they're preaching from the pulpit. We want this second outpouring. We want this miraculous thing to happen in the last days, and it's happening in front of their very eyes. And a lot of times they don't see it, but there are people who do see it, and that's why we love talking about it.
Amen.
So,
Hey,
I'm gonna go ahead.
before you go to questions, real quick, because we didn't quite finish the feast yet. One that's overlooked is the second Passover, and I bring that out with my as in the days of Noah teaching, and I think that is something that we've overlooked, because that's the timing of the flood, and so just as Passover, as we discussed, as a time of salvation, second Passover was a time of salvation as well, that being for that of Noah, okay? And so we shouldn't be surprised still, I think, if that will happen in the end times. I'm not, we can't write it off. I'm really concerned that we're not thinking about that. And then obviously with Shavuot, that being, the time of the marriage, the covenant coming together. So something for us to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize, guys. I didn't mean to jump ahead.
That's all good.
We're going through the feast, and we kind of started at the end, kind of like just last night. I was with some friends, and we watched through some Star Wars movies, and and that in the trilogies, they start in the middle and they go to the end, and then they start at the beginning. We kind of did that same thing tonight, so I was missing a few steps in there, but please forgive me. All right, so we'll go to the first question we have coming in from Kat Onek Lisa, and she asks, in 1 Kings 12:13 tells of Jeroboam appointing his own feast time, the 15th of the 8th month. In lieu of the Feast of Tabernacles, does Steve see any significance to this date or time every year, or a possible future event that would be of wickedness? If I read the calendar correct, the 15th of the 8th month is late October, November.
Yeah, anytime you read what the Northern Kingdom has done, you can't help but think. Well, here's the thing too. First, great point, and I'm glad she brought that up. Anytime you see dates mentioned, am I saying it something's going to happen in the future like that? No, not at all. However, Yahweh doesn't waste words. They're there for a reason, even if we don't understand it, and we may never understand it on this side of eternity. Okay, but we should always pursue that understanding. So, great point. I'll need to look in more into that and see if there's something that could be significant to that. Yeah, it definitely makes you think. Good point.
Wonderful. Next question comes from Jennifer, and she asks, how do you guys celebrate Sukkot? I know for me, we usually just spend the time camping out. Last year we had a really cool Sukkot with around it. It was really cool, and we'd go out and we'd do a barbecue and feast out, and really, I think it's a time to camp out. But honestly, as I've grown into it, I've only been in a Torah pursuant walk for maybe 3 years, and each time I really dip my feet in deeper into practicing Sukkot, because it's really the one where it takes a lot of commitment to be able to practice the entire feast on, camping out under a sukkah. So I know that's really what I'm going to be doing this year, is going to a place and camping out, and hopefully with the other Now You See TV guys and the Tishner family, who live all real close with us. So we're all going to be trying to keep Sukkot together, I think, and I think it'd be awesome. Amen.
Yeah, I'm the same way. When we came in, I was to this understanding. I was like all guns forward, and let's just jump right in and do it. And so now I've had friends, though, just let you know, who they don't necessarily know that these are, people who are, in their upper 50s and even low 60s and some. And so they don't necessarily all go out into the tents. Now they used to, and just this last year, they said, you know what, Steve, oh, we're just getting so old, and so we're just talking about it, and then it goes back to the element of you can't keep it. Okay, so don't beat yourself up if you don't do it right. We're all trying to do things, but in their sharing with me, they said they had so much fun because what they did each night during Sukkot, they would all go to a different family's house, and they would stay up talking Bible, doing this, and you name it. And I think that is like so cool. It's getting together with Yahweh's people and talking and sharing. And if you're out there and you're going to go to a Sukkot somewhere, this is what I ask of you. Have your beliefs. Don't be afraid to share your beliefs. But please don't force your beliefs on others. Make it to where others will want to be around you and where you will want to be around them. This is a time, okay, I'm going to share this too. Sukkot is the only command where we're received to told, rejoice. You are commanded to rejoice during Sukkot. Okay. And I think I have the answer as to why we're commanded to rejoice. Okay, you ready for it? Have you ever been around somebody that you just don't want to be around? You're commanded to rejoice. Okay. So my point is, make it to where they want to rejoice around you. Don't make it to where it's a grudgery to have to follow that command. So, because, we're all guilty of being forceful and pushy on something we believe, and doggone, I just know I'm right. I wish you would just get this, let the Father prick their hearts. You throw it out there, and in time, it's a seed, okay? The Father, if it's the truth, the Father will grow it within them, okay? So if you're going to go to Sukkot, any Sukkot, please remember, be the one that everybody wants to be around. Just a thought.
That's awesome. And the Feast of Sukkot is a time where the people were bringing in all of the foreigners and the people around them. They were inviting everybody in, and I think it's an instance of where God wants us to make everybody else jealous of how great a time we're having. Carl, who we have on CTV sometimes, and he also does a program here at this radio station. He says that, the Jewish rabbis would say, you don't know true joy unless you've experienced the Feast of Tabernacles, talking about how this is just a full-out blast. And whenever I look at, people who are like, oh, we can't give up Christmas and Easter because that's what brings people who are unbelievers in, because we're having such a wonderful, beautiful time. We have a nice Christmas tree and presents and pretty lights, and that's what hooks all these unbelievers in to then come practice our pagan festival that has nothing to do with our Messiah. So, and then I like to bring up the topic of, that's exactly what the Feast of Tabernacles was meant to do. Whenever you compare the Feast of Tabernacles to Passover, which I believe is a much more inclusive covenant type meal. It's, you do it with your close friends and family. It's a very serious meal to take because it's saying, I will follow after your commandments, and we need to do it according to the word. But in contrast, Tabernacles was when you invite everybody in, come and party with us because we're celebrating Yahweh and all that he's done for us. And so it just,
Yeah, amen.
All right. Next question is, somebody asks, do we need to memorize all of the laws?
Well, if you can, you're only going to benefit yourself, but wow, what a job, I know I do my best to remember all that I can. And it's so funny because someone will ask me a question on a teaching that I've done in the past, and I'll say, well, give me a few minutes. I'm going to go watch my teaching real quick, and I'll tell you what I believe. Because it's so easy to study a topic, and then you go to the next topic. Well, then you forget what you learned back here, because there's so much in it. It's so rich, and it's so thick, and it's just so interwoven with so many other things. And so that's why I'm longing for the day when the new covenant is truly intact, when the law is written upon our hearts. We won't have to tell our neighbor to know the Lord, or our brother to know Yahweh. It's all going to be there. But to your question, do you need to? I think more so if you can, cool. But to say you need to, that almost puts a have to element to it. So be cautious with the have to type point.
Mm-hmm. Next question from Purple Plushie. They asked, how is everyone going to get to the second Exodus location? There are about 7 billion on Earth right now.
Well, that all depends on who you ask on their opinion of the second Exodus. Okay. And in my teaching, I bring forth that the second Exodus happens at the end of the tribulation. And this is those of the survivors that you mentioned earlier, Jake. That's the survivors all coming to Jerusalem at that time. That's the second Exodus. Okay. Will it be that way? I don't know. There's, again, lots of opinions. I've heard many opinions, and they just haven't convinced me that they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. Okay. They just haven't convinced me of their view as of yet. But what was this? Is Purple Plushie who I'm talking to again?
Yep.
Okay. To your point is that, forgive me, I'm failing to remember the exact verse, but it says that this Exodus will just overwhelm, okay, the first one, okay, and I say no one's going to remember the first one because of how great this last one is. Now, I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day. Well, what's the how great? Is it because of how many people? And that's what he tends to believe. And I said, well, I kind of differ. And he goes, why? I go, well, because I don't see in the first Exodus we were reminded of in Egypt, okay, they came from one location. But in this next Exodus, like you just mentioned, they're coming from all over the world. That's what makes it greater. It's like it's not just one location to the next location. They're coming from all over the world, coming to Yahweh's place in Jerusalem, and that's how I see it. Now there can still be more people, okay, though I struggle with that still. I tend to think that it's called the Greater Exodus because of just what you mentioned, because they're coming from all over the world and not so much more people. And again, I'm not saying that's not going to be more people. I just kind of struggle in that view at this time.
Yeah, I know one of my favorite topics prophetically to study out is this whole idea of the Greater Exodus, because whenever you pick up the idea that there's going to be, once again, a recurring cyclical thing that happens in the last days that parallels that which happened in Egypt, and then you also come to realize that the plagues in Egypt also, in a way, parallel the judgments that happen in Revelation. You can see that this is some big deal stuff, and I believe it's I wish I could remember the verse, but I believe it's Isaiah or Jeremiah that talks about they'll be crossing over the 7 streams of the world.
Yes.
Referring to the oceans. So instead of a little bit of the Red Sea, they're crossing over oceans this time.
Well, it's funny you say that, because in my opinion, how I read that, my opinion, as how I'm currently at anyway, is when all things kick off, whenever it happens, I believe it's all going to be started with a massive global earthquake. That being Isaiah 24. Isaiah 24 to me is Revelation chapter 6 and the 6th seal. Those are one and both the same event in my heart. Okay, that's how I'm understanding it, and that kicks everything off. And I see that being what actually starts the Pangea effect, and those 7 oceans are actually forced into being just that, 7 streams. That's where I'm now. Am I right? Who knows? We'll find out when it all happens. But that's kind of how I'm at.
Well, I'll tell you what. I hope so, because I'd much rather walk across a shortened Pacific Ocean than
Yeah, exactly,
the entire way. So we have the next question coming in from Sean, and they ask, we have not got to the point of what was said a few minutes ago. If he comes on the Day of Atonement when the bride has no spot or blemish, Now, what does that say to all of you guys? It says to me, no one left out except the ones with their name blotted out of the book. Right? Sorry. Let me try to decipher this.
Yeah.
So, if he comes back for those who have no spot or blemish, are those who are left the ones that have their names blotted out of the book of life?
Okay. To answer this question, no. First, let's not forget that it's the according. Oops, sorry, here I got some chords I'm hitting down here. The element of who gets taken in the resurrection. That's the big question here. Okay. Well, to my understanding, it's going to be the Church of Philadelphia. Okay. Now, so what do we do with the other six churches? Okay. They're part of the fellowship. They're part of the body of Messiah. But they obviously what? They have to go through a time of purification. And that's what Daniel mentions in Daniel chapter 11. And so I don't think these are the people who are blotted out. I think they did not make themselves ready for the first resurrection. And Revelation 20 says, blessed and holy are those who take part in the first resurrection. Okay, you're blessed if you get to be a part of the first resurrection. Does it mean you're condemned if you're not in the first resurrection? Not necessarily. Okay, you can still enter into the millennium in this physical body. In my teaching, the Armageddon and the Parousia, I discussed this. Okay, so it does not, just because you missed the first resurrection does not mean you're blotted out immediately. Okay, as Jake mentioned, there are survivors, okay, after the tribulation who continue living. And so it doesn't mean you're blotted out, according to my understanding, as it is right now.
I'm glad you brought that up because it reminds me of a question I had for you is, whenever we look at who Philadelphia is, it's very clear believers want to be part of that church, and if we really try to figure out what characterizes the Church of Philadelphia, what does characterize the Church of Philadelphia, and can you see any certain groups or denominations or churches that you feel would fall into the category of any of the other churches? Because if we're talking about, in the last days, we're all sifted into these different 7 churches. Any particular, I'm not saying everybody in that denomination or in that belief set would fall into a particular type of church, but while we're thinking, okay, who's Philadelphia? Those who are getting themselves repentant and humble before he comes back and has to set us straight, and they're keeping the commandments and they're living humbly and they're loving their neighbor and loving God. Then can we also, maybe theorize where is people in the world following in these other churches in the book of Revelation? Well,
first let me say, I think only, Yahweh and Yeshua knows who's in what church. Okay. And to say what denominations would be this church, and I think that's almost kind of dangerous, because I think you can have somebody in one denomination, whatever denomination you want to call it, okay? You can have someone who's in the Church of Laodicea who's in that denomination, but someone who's in the Church of Philadelphia from that same denomination. Same with Torah people, okay? You can have a fellowship over here who pretty much believes all the same things, okay? Their faith, and as far as what they believe, may be pretty doggone close, okay? But you have this man over here, well, he's in the Church of Laodicea in the eyes of Yahweh, but this guy over here is in the Church of Smyrna, or, whatever, okay? I think we need to be cautious of using man's labels to fill in Yeshua's labels, okay? It can play a role, don't get me wrong, but to me, I did a teaching on the Church of Philadelphia, and the biggest thing I believe with the Church of Philadelphia is love. I mean, the very name means love, brotherly love. I think all 7 churches, and spoken to in Revelation, I really believe these are Torah fellowships. Okay. Now, does that mean that therefore, if no one's following Torah, that they're not saved? No, I'm not saying that. Okay, I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying their accountability, what they knew. Because here's the thing. My concern, I hear a lot of people who are in the Torah group, Okay, they think they're it. And they think, therefore, they're in the Church of Philadelphia. Well, I'm sorry. I don't see that. Okay. I would love to say that's true. But, you know, I just can't see it. And I've seen a lot of people in Torah spewing forth so much hate to people who are not in Torah. It makes me shameful to say that I'm a part of that. Okay. And I don't know. You know, Yeshua said, you know, by love one another. Okay. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. What do you do with that? Okay. You love. Okay. That's how people will know we are his disciples. That's the foundation. You know, and let's not forget that's what love is, the sum of what? The law and the prophets. If you're truly, truly following the law and the prophets, you will truly be loving your neighbor. Okay, now just because you're loving your neighbor does not mean you're truly following the law. Keep that in mind. But if you're truly following these, the law and the prophets, you will be loving your neighbor. And I think we forget that. And so I forgot what the question was, so I got off to preaching. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe if I can better explain kind of the heart behind the question is, whenever we look at these 7 churches separated into different groups, and you've brought out kind of the idea that we'll be sifted into one of these churches in the last days, I feel like it would be important for somebody to be able to identify at any current moment, what church am I falling in line with? Because then I can see what the scripture tells me I need to start, getting right. And maybe because of that, I can get into the Church of Philadelphia because I've repented and I've turned from the punishment that was on the Church of Laodicea or something like that.
Right. Okay, I'm with you. Well, to answer that question, what did all 7 churches hear Yeshua say to them? He said the same thing to all 7. And what he said was, let him who has ears hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So we shouldn't be so much focused on what does this church believe? Does that match me? What does this church do? Does that match me? Well, our focus should be on what's the Spirit saying to me right now that I need to get my heart right with them. That should be our focus on anything and every single day of our life. What is the Spirit saying to me? That should be our everyday life. He said that to all 7 churches, all of them. Okay. And I really believe, a day doesn't go by that I don't pray, Father, am I doing everything I'm supposed to be doing? What is there anything I need to get out? Then or stop doing, and something more I need to be doing. I just can't stop praying that I am doing what he wants me to do. Not that I'm fearful of it. I'm not at all. I know right now what I'm doing. I have 100% peace. I'm following him. But I don't want to get stuck in a rut. I want to make sure that, there are seasons and times for everything. And I've always got to make it a point that I am fluid with him. If he says, go here, do that, then I need to make sure I'm going to do that. So I think our focus should be, do we have an ear to hear? That should be our prayer.
Excellent. And, I completely can see that now, because we shouldn't be looking at each church and saying, am I in this church? We should be looking and seeing, do the sins in multiple churches or the problems with multiple churches apply to me?
Right. Yeah, good point.
And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so we're going to move on to our last question. And this is from Alec, and he asks, I have questions reading the apocryphal books. 4th Ezra, the last chapter, talks about a great destruction, that there would be cities nearly empty, and there would be men to till the ground. There wouldn't be men to till the ground. Should those extra books be part of the end time prophecy of Revelations?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't read them all. I've read a couple of them. They bring up some interesting stuff. I don't know. I'll say this. I don't believe that Yahweh would leave us hanging and just leave a whole bunch of information out for us. Now, that being said, there could be added information that can fill in a lot of void and a lot of gaps for us. Okay. So, but my point is that which we believe is scriptures, Okay, Genesis to Revelation. Okay. I believe what we need to get us through is there. Now, what about Enoch, Jubilees, Jasher, all these other ones? And I've heard lots of great debate, some good points on all sides, okay? And I can only tell you that I haven't read any of those. I would like to. I just don't have time. I'm so busy working on other stuff. But so could they fill a lot of gap in? Absolutely. Maybe. But I believe with all my heart that Yahweh would not leave his believers without having at least the foundation of what we need to be established. And so to answer your question, do we have to have those? I don't think so. But it might be good to read through them. So, but I have not read them all. So I'm probably not the good person to ask that question to.
That brings to mind kind of the story of Josiah, where the people were falling into rebellion and they completely lost the books of the law.
Yeah.
And nobody knew. And Josiah was walking uprightly before God, but he had no idea. He had a heart, to obey God and please God, but he didn't know what the commandments were. But I'll tell you what, whenever that priest brought the scrolls out and he read it to Josiah, he tore his garments and wept.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, shouldn't that be the same position we take, whenever we hear the word of God and we see something in our life that is different or not, falling in line? Are we to the point where we're willing to tear our clothes and weep?
Right.
Because we want to be more like Yeshua.
Amen.
Well, that concludes all of our questions. Thank you, Steve, for coming on Now You See TV. Guys, if you enjoyed what you heard and you want to check out more of Steve's teaching, you can find out more by going to torahfamily.org. It's a great resource, and I encourage you to go and check that out. So thank you, Steve, so much for coming on Now You See TV and giving us a great show tonight.
Thank you, Jake, for having me. It's a joy to be here, brother.
Excellent. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up, guys. So without further ado, we're just going to end off with a high five and a shalom. So take care, everyone.
Shalom.